Hello everyone. In an earlier video I said I wanted to review all the X-Men movies, so today I rewatched the first one. I'm very fond of the original X-Men trilogy, at least the first two. I never really liked the third one even as a kid, because a lot of characters die in it. Cyclops, Xavier, Jean, I didn't like that. I didn't like any of that. But the first two have a very special place in my heart because they were actually my introduction to the X-Men. I was born in 97, so I missed out on the X-Men the Animated Series when it was originally airing, and I never saw any reruns of it. Spider-Man, I did watch the 90s show a lot as a kid, though, but that's because I was already into the character and I had the VHS tapes. I didn't get into X-Men until I was, I think, about 10 years old, and I was given the first 3 movies on DVD. So this is where my interest in the X-Men was started. Despite that, I watched this movie as though I would never seen it, as if I didn't have that connection to it. I went into this just watching it as an adaptation of the comics, and in that regard, it's very hit and miss. I would say this entire film series is very hit and miss as an adaptation of the X-Men. I will say I enjoy the movie. I do not think that the first X-Men is a bad movie by any means. It's not a great movie. I think it kind of feels more like a pilot for a TV series than a big budget movie. It's very small scale, and I honestly kind of like that. So let's look at the things that the movie does right as an adaptation of the X-Men. Gets the themes right. Mutants, people born with superhuman abilities, they're outcast from society, they're mistrusted, hated, and feared. You got Magneto. He believes that humanity will never learn to accept mutants, and he's very extreme in his way. Then you got Xavier, and he believes that there can be peace, and he teaches, mutants to control their powers and to just fit into society. And the X-Men are, his team that protect the world from mutants like Magneto. So it gets the basics, the basic idea of the comic right. As for some of the characters, not so much. So, starting off, the character they did the best job with was Wolverine. As the series went on, they overdid it with him, to the detriment of the other characters, but Hugh Jackman gave a fantastic performance pretty much in all the movies that he was in. So yeah, as the films went on, they did overdo it with Wolverine. But I think it worked in the first 2 films, because the first film sets up an arc with him, and the second film concludes it. By the third one, we should focus on somebody else, but for those first 2 movies, I think it was justified putting him in the spotlight. And I think it worked really well in this movie, because as he's being introduced to the X-Men, we are as well. And he has some pretty good character development in the film, going from not caring about much of anything to having something that he wants to fight for. 2 other characters I'd say the movie does a pretty good job with would be Professor Xavier and Magneto. Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen gave pretty good performances in the movie, and like with Hugh Jackman, I think they continued to throughout the series. Unfortunately, that's pretty much it for the really standout performances of the movie. Everybody else really is either playing their character completely wrong or just not doing much of anything of note. And I think that would be okay for the first movie if it weren't for the fact that really none of those characters are improved on in any of the future films. Now, first, we've got Cyclops. And these movies drop the ball on him so hard. I did a whole video on the character as he is in the comics, and why I think he's pretty underrated. It's called Explaining Cyclops. But yeah, these movies really did not do him justice at all. Now, I think that this film did the best job with him out of all the movies. He got a decent amount of screen time. He actually got to lead the team at the end. He had that really cool moment where Wolverine is trying to save Rogue, but Magneto's like holding him back, and then Scott says, "I have a shot, I'm taking it," and he hits Magneto with an optic blast. That was a really cool moment. He gets expanded on a little bit as a character. Not much, but there's some of it there. One scene in particular I really like is where Xavier's in a coma, and Scott says, like he's like, "Can you hear me?" And he says, "You taught me everything in my life worth knowing, and I want you to know if anything happens, I'll take care of them." Referring to the students of the school. I thought that was a really nice scene. And actually, there were a couple moments that were cut out of the film that I really wish they hadn't, because they do add to his character a little bit. There's one scene when, like the first time Wolverine is interacting with Jean, when she's like showing him his bedroom, and Scott walks in, there's a little bit of dialogue they cut out of that scene, and I don't understand why. Basically, like, Wolverine says, "You gonna tell me to stay away from your girl?" And Scott says, "If I had to do that, she wouldn't be my girl." And then Wolverine says, "I guess you got nothing to worry about, Cyclops." And then Scott says, "It must really burn you up that some boy like me had to save your life. Might want to be careful. I might not be there next time." And if you look in the deleted scenes, there's some dialogue they cut out where after Wolverine says, "I guess you got nothing to worry about, Cyclops," Scott says, "I really would feel better if you take this a bit more seriously. Some mutants take pride in their gifts, especially those of us willing to fight for what we believe in." Wolverine says, "You ever seen real combat, boy?" And Scott says, "Have you?" And Wolverine looks a little uncomfortable, and Scott says, "Don't like to talk about your past." And Wolverine says, "Not to you." And then we get the "must really burn you up that some boy like me had to save your life." That extra bit of dialogue shows a bit more character to Scott, that, he is that soldier type character that he is in the comics. He takes what he does in the X-Men seriously, and the problem with Wolverine isn't just that Logan is interested in Jean, it's also that Wolverine, doesn't take the X-Men seriously. So he's offending Scott on two levels. The other character that they really dropped the ball with would be Rogue. This is not, in any way, aside from the powers and the accent, the Rogue of the comics. This is not the confident, sassy, fun Rogue of the comics. This is a completely different character. Now, I get what they were going for, and I think that as its own thing, it works for the narrative of the movie, but it's just not Rogue. And that's kind of annoying for me, because I like Rogue a lot. Same with Cyclops, but at least Cyclops had little hints of the character of the comics in the movie. And then you look at X-Men Evolution, which took the idea of what they did with Rogue here, but did it better, because they kept more in line with the character of the comics. So, yeah, for the movie it worked, but for the character it just didn't. Then there's Jean and Storm, and I think that they're just okay in this movie. Storm has that really dumb line of what happens to a toad when it's struck by lightning, but her character was okay in the movie. Jean as well. I think that Jean got more interesting in the second movie, and then the third one just dropped the ball on that one, didn't it? But we'll get to that one later. So after the X-Men, we got the Brotherhood, which I already said Magneto's pretty good in this movie. Sabretooth is just... well, they got the look right, but not the personality. They downgraded him to a dumb henchman. Toad, on the other hand, is kind of cool. He doesn't really have much of a personality or really much dialogue, but when he's on screen and, when he's fighting the X-Men near the end, I don't know, I just thought he was pretty cool. I like this version of Toad better than really any other version I've seen. Mystique is pretty cool. And honestly, I like Mystique in this trilogy more than what they did later with Jennifer Lawrence. But we'll also get to that one later too. The last thing I want to talk about would be the black leather uniforms. Now, in the first two films, I don't mind them. I think that in the context of the early films, I think that it wouldn't make sense for them to have their flashy, colorful costumes of the comics. I absolutely prefer those costumes, but they're not trying to be a superhero team in these first movies. They're not trying to be out in the open and public and all that. They're very secretive about what they're doing. So in that context, I think that the black leather works. By the third one, I think they should have switched to the comic book accurate costumes, because at that point they weren't being as secretive. But I think the uniforms worked in this movie. I also like how if you look closely, they have these little patterns on their uniforms that are the colors that they primarily wear in the comics. So I thought that was a neat little thing they did there. So yeah, the first X-Men movie. I'm still very fond of this movie because of how I watched it a lot as a kid, and it was my introduction to the X-Men. I did still enjoy the movie. Like I said, I don't think it is a bad movie at all. It's not a great movie, but it's fairly enjoyable. But as an adaptation of the X-Men, it's got some problems. Does some things right, but it does quite a few things it does wrong too. So I don't know when the review for X-Men 2 will be up, hopefully by next week. But until then, let me know what you think about this movie in the comments. Thank you for watching. I hope to see you next time, and you have a good day.